My name is Jim Keough, and the tall, handsome guy here is Eric Sutherland. And I got tuned into this because he lives just up the road from us. And all of a sudden I saw the smoke coming out of the woods. And I thought I better go check on it. And it was Eric boiling that day. So, anyways, what we'd like to do tonight is give you a little picture of the history of maple syrup sugaring. But then we're going to jump to Eric's process, which is almost as modern as you can get. There's probably a few guys that have a couple of extra contraptions around, but Eric's got most of them, and he will show you how that whole thing works. So, and if you have any questions, I'm sure you'd like to answer them if you got them.
I'll answer anything.
And at the end of the
Rich
show...
Steiner over here, he'll answer too.
Yeah?
He's a big moose.
Oh, good,
guy.
good. And they do it kind of the old-fashioned way compared to Eric, so he might have some additional information for you. And then Eric brought some product down, so if you're short on maple syrup and it's turned you on, you're welcome to buy some at the end of the show. Maple sugaring is not a new process. You can go all the way back to the Iroquois, the Algonquin, up in Canada, northern New York. We're in what's called, they call it the Maple Belt. And it goes from somewhere in the Midwest right across southern Canada and right across northern New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. So we're part of this collection of maple trees. But here's a picture of a Ojibwe woman boiling sap that they collected. So the English and the French learned this process from the Native Americans. There's always a story about how would they have discovered that the sap coming out of this tree was something you could use. Well, there's a number of different stories. One was a chief threw an axe and it hit the tree, and this liquid started dropping out of the bottom of the blade, and he took and tasted a little bit and said, well, you know, that's not bad, there's nothing wrong with that. And then eventually people learned how to boil it down a little bit and make it more sweet and so on. And then there was another one where a Native American was walking through the woods, and there was a branch broken on a maple tree, and there was, again, a drip of the sap coming out, and they tasted it. There is a myth that goes along with it, and that was that originally the sap coming out was pure maple sap, and the Indians were drinking it, and they'd get lethargic and just sitting around not willing to do any work, so the shaman put a curse on all the maple trees and watered down the sap so that it was they had to work at it to get the final product. So
I heard that too.
Whichever one of those is true, you can take that home and pass it on. But we think of maple syrup as something we put on pancakes, or we eat the maple sugar candy and so on. But the Native Americans actually found uses for it. They cured their meat with it. And of course, we're aware of maple ham, cured ham and so on. Well, they would cure their venison and so on with the maple. They also used it as a sweetener for some of the bitter medicines that they had. That made sense? And they also used it as an anesthetic. So that one I couldn't figure out how, but somehow they realized maybe putting it over a wound or something that they had to work on, and the maple syrup anesthetized that particular area. We eat it and we love it and so on, but there's a lot of nutrition in maple syrup as well. These are the minerals they found: phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, iron, and calcium, all in maple syrup. And of course, a lot of those things are good for health. And we take potassium, we take magnesium. Well, now you can just sit there and drink Maple syrup. I did find that we didn't have any honey, and I was having a cup of tea. Well, I like honey with I like tea with my honey is the way I like it. There wasn't any, so I used maple syrup and put it in as a sweetener for my tea. A little different flavor. Maple syrup, it takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. So it's a fairly rare commodity, and it's a lot of work to get there. So it was actually used between the Native Americans and the English and the French. It was used in trading. And the Native Americans would create bars of solid maple sugar. And they could use that in trading. So maple syrup has got a history to it. For the Native Americans, what they would do, they didn't have the modern things. They made a birch bark bowl to catch it in. Well, their canoes are birch bark, and they float on the water, so that worked. And they carved out a little wooden spigot, and they bored a hole in the tree and stuck the spigot in and set the birch bark bowl underneath it. And then they would take that and pour it into a clay pot of some kind. And they let it set overnight. Well, now, if you know maple sugaring, you know that cold nights, freezing nights, warm days gets that sap flowing. So at night, the water, being lighter than the sap, in the part of the sap, would float to the top and it would freeze. They'd skim off the ice, and that took care of some of they didn't have to boil it as long. So again, you know, they worked on this and they figured it out, and they figured out the easiest way to do it. Eric will probably bring this up too, but Canada is the largest maple syrup producing country in the world. So, and a lot of the stuff that's on the market in terms of equipment and so on comes from there. I came across this quote from a young man whose family sugared, and this is what he said. For many people, the harbinger of spring is seeing that the first robin or the tiny green shoots of crocus poking up through the snow. But for those of us with maple trees, we know spring is just around the corner when the sap starts flowing and the sugar season begins. I spent countless hours as a child trudging through the snow with my dad as we tapped all the maple trees on our property. And I spent just as many late nights sitting out in the sugar shed, steam billowing around me, reading, listening to the Prairie Home Companion on the radio. It was warm and humid and lovely in the deep cold winter. And those of you who have done that, you know, sitting there with a fire, the sugar house is pretty warm by the time you get done boiling that night. There were several kinds of maple trees, but the sugar maple was the best. It had the sweetest sap. So these are the ones that we see, the most colorful ones that we see around here. And it all starts with a hole in the tree, a spigot, and a bucket. Okay? And depending on that temperature change, night and day, would affect the flow of the syrup. So, freezing nights, right? And we have those, and we go right up into April, sometimes into May, but they're there. And so fall and spring are the two best times of the year. And it's a pretty, until you get into Eric's level, it's a pretty manual task. Trudging through the woods, tapping the trees, putting the buckets up, collecting the buckets, dumping them into the big barrel and transporting it back to the sugar house. Notice how this person is drilling at a slight angle, and you needed that, of course, to get that flow coming down the spigot. And power drills today. Spigot's driven in the hole, buckets hung on it. The system requires that the pots be checked frequently and emptied. You don't want them overflowing. And now, some of these you don't see covers on them, but you also see them with a metal cover over the top or some kind of cover over the top, just to keep out the stuff falling from the trees. And here we see, depending on the size of the tree, how many taps you could put into it. All right? Now, this, they came up with their own system using plastic buckets and PVC pipe tapped into the spigot, and that's how they collected it. So from the smaller buckets on the trees to larger buckets, 5-gallon cans or whatever, the sap is collected and brought back to the sugar house. And sometimes child labor was involved. She looks pretty happy though, so I think she's okay.
Bucket's empty.
And using an old guy boat yoke to carry the buckets. Transporting, and if you got a big enough yard of maples, you've got a big huge bucket pulled by either a team of horses or a team of oxen, and you go through you'd have a path through the woods where your buckets are. They'd dump the bucket into the big barrel, and then it would get hauled back to the sugar shack. So the larger the operation, the more mechanical things and more power you're going to need. And you can see the sugar shack in the back there. These were fairly temporary things. They weren't made to, live in. But you get to that early winter and the snow, creates some problems for you. Here they've got it on a skid or a sled. Yeah, you're out in the wilderness and you're out in the temperatures doing this work. So small operation, you got a little pot boiled over a fire, and you're not going to get a lot out of that. You're lucky if you get a pint out of it, but for some people it was the process more than it was the final product. And they just, it connected them to nature in a way that you don't get it when you walk into the store and pick it off the shelf. These sugar shacks were often crudely built. They were only used twice a year for weeks at a time. And there's always a vent at the top to release all that steam coming out. And of course, you got to have a source of fuel, and firewood was critical. They're boiling it in that pan, and as soon as it reaches the right consistency, and some people probably did it by sight, or they tasted it, or whatever. Other people might have had a thermometer that they worked with.
There's still a guy here in town doing it that way.
Really?
Yeah, I think Jeremiah, that's how he does it.
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised he's not here, Bob. Yeah, he still does it that way.
And you can see that what they're doing is it's been boiled. It's where they want it. They're pouring it into those buckets with a cheesecloth on it to take out any last-minute impurities that might be still in there. It doesn't matter what method you use. The final product is sweet to the palate. And I'm not going to talk about the colorings, but notice the different colors in those jars. And Eric's going to explain a little bit of how those different colors come about and so on. And some people like it dark, some people like it light, some people like it medium. Okay, now, let's jump ahead to today's.
You want me to?
Go ahead, you pick it up from here, Eric. You know what you got here.
So, Jim explained the history and I'm gonna explain the technology end because we don't have any buckets hanging in the woods. It's all pipeline tubing. He had the horse and buggy team. That's how they transported it before. The black and the bottom blue tube there coming in, that's basically how we transport it. It's just a highway system for the liquid to flow through. And then you can see where there's a loop off the top there. Every 100 feet, and that system goes out 2,500 feet, which is just under half a mile. We put these loops in, that's helping transfer vacuum because the system's hooked on a vacuum pump. So if anybody's ever been around the dairy industry, guys that are milking their farm, they're pulling the milk after the cow's being milked, and that's what it is, a vacuum. And that's my shed there is the picture of the vacuum pump and where the liquid's coming in. Yeah, I guess that's what he's got written there. The far vertical cylinder, that's where the liquid's coming in, and there's a pump in there, and it's as easy as it just flows in and pumps to the holding tanks once it's in that shed. The work for me is pre-season in the woods because I've got a lot of bears around again this year, and last year they did a tremendous amount of damage, and literally it's a needle in a haystack. You've got to find every cut, tooth mark, chew, wherever the line's broken in order for the system to work properly. So that's where the labor is for me, and I usually do that over the course of the winter, try to get as much done in the early fall as I can. So when I'm ready to go tap, I can just go tap, and it's that easy hopefully, but you still find more down, and that's where some of the labor comes in, I guess, but that system there pumps these tanks. The last frame there, my system would work on gravity, but without the vacuum to pull all the sap every night when it freezes, if we didn't have that vacuum, the sap would freeze, and it would take a couple days. It could take a week depending on what the weather does. So that technology in that shed is really a lifesaver as far as making this happen here, because we are a winter climate every single day. And then when it's not, well, it goes right to summer and it's over. You know? But the tanks, it pumps over. Those are each 1,000 gallons. On a good afternoon, we'll fill one of those in 4 or 5 hours, and then from there I hook up to even more technology. Do you have a shot of it? Yeah, okay. So reverse osmosis, anybody know anything about that? It takes liquid off of liquid through high pressure filtration, and you can see the horizontal tubes in there. Basically it's forcing the sap through there, and through the filters it's removing the sugar into a concentrate, taking the water off, so we're not having to boil as much, because when the sap's coming in out of the woods, it's 98% water. So if one of those tanks was full and I didn't have this machine, I'd have to cook 900 gallons of water off basically in order to get to that 100 gallons of sweeter stuff. This makes the 100 gallons of sweet stuff even sweeter, and I don't have to burn any firewood, labor. This machine does all that work for me. Again, it would be doable without it, but with it, it just makes it easier. So that the higher grade sugar content goes into what we call the head tank up there, and that's what feeds the evaporator when we're boiling. And so the evaporator's got a float valve with the height of the liquid in it. As it burns down, the valve opens and it feeds more in off the head tank. Literally at this point, I'm not doing anything but just waiting for it to come out, really. What's your next one, Jim?
Next one, I think, is your fire, your boiling.
Is that Uncle Billy? So when we're boiling this, it's higher grade concentrate. We feed the fire every 6 minutes. You could literally burn people in it. It's like an incinerator because it burns so hot, but the heat of the fire is because you want to get the syrup across the finish line as quick as possible. So basically, we're taking the sap out of the woods in probably less than 15, 18 hours, it's made into syrup. And by doing that and using this technology, it's creating this really great product. The old product was good, but it's not as good as the newer technology stuff, I guess. Firewood, that's our biggest labor. There's lots of it.
Well, one of the things you found using that,
The reverse
Reverse
osmosis,
osmosis.
it cuts the firewood down by 2/3. We used to burn through 25 face cord in like 3 weeks, and now I go through like 5 to 7 maybe. I'm on my 2nd year of what's in there, and I still have 2 more years, I think, now, so that's a good deal. Yeah, I explained that, the flow valve opens, close at the correct level.
right there.
Okay, so what he's got pictured there is, it's an auto draw, and has anybody ever made any beer or wine or know anybody? Every distiller, candy maker, sugar maker, we all have, oh my God, I just lost that. What is it? No, the
Regulator?
hydrometer cup. Yeah, why can't I call it? Hydrometer cup matches with, you can go back to the screen, Jim.
Yep.
So the blue screen, it's actually a computer, and it's programmed to the orange valve up on top. You can kind of see in the steam there.
Right there.
Once I program that computer with the hydrometer cup, it pours perfect syrup for the rest of the day until I'm done. Relative humidity changes that, elevation, at sea level, boiling temps 211, 209.
212.
It is 212. So here at we're like 1,900 feet where the sugar house is, it ends up at 209 to 211, that's why I said that. But, so once that's all programmed, that's when it's really easy, because it just pours off, and it's great to watch it, because at that point, you're tasting it, it's warm, and when you really taste it and it tastes good, it's like that self-satisfaction of...
So this has a thermometer into these
Pans.
tanks, okay? It's measuring what's in those tanks.
There's a probe in there,
Yeah.
heat probe. As the syrup is finishing, we've started it with the osmosis. We're changing the bricks, which is the liquid density of the syrup. It's liquid bricks. And at the end, it's all got to be 66.9 bricks in order to sell it. It's got to be perfect. And that's what this technology does, is it starts it in the shed, and then it goes into the reverse osmosis machine, and then the final finish with that auto draw it's perfect, and it tastes great.
And when that hits that mark that he has it set, it starts coming out of this faucet right here. And if it gets up to like 219, it's coming out.
It
Like,
just pours out.
It's pouring out. We got a, 5-gallon, 6-gallon bucket there?
I get worried sometimes it's coming out too fast and it's gonna burn the pans, which sometimes happens too, but we don't need to get into that tonight.
That's a whole different story.
Sad story.
Yeah.
And so this is so after we've got it, you can see on the bottom, there's the kettle full of syrup.
Right here. That
So-
came out of that faucet.
The filter press is on the left, that's this bank here with these tubes. We run one of these tubes in, and I've got the kettles all lined up, and there's papers in here. So we hook an air compressor up to this filter press, and through, it's forcing with air the hot syrup through this bank of filters, and what happens with these papers is it's catching all the sugar sand. Has anybody ever got syrup and you get done and there's a 1/4 inch of sand or sludge in the bottom? This takes all of that out, so it's perfectly clear syrup at the end, so you don't have any of that. It's just more attractive to the customer, and But this is the station, this is the filter press, this is the canner, so the syrup's coming out of this into the canner. When it's 183 to 185 degrees, you can see everything's lined up. And Mom or my sister Becky are sitting at the stool, and once it hits the temperature, they can everything. Jim's there to help. He's often putting caps on, wiping up whatever gets spilled, and
Very technical job.
yeah, it's a nice picture. Yeah, and so part of my reason for doing this was I wanted to bring my family
Margaret.
together, and this does that. Yeah, mom's in the background, you can see her hand. But it's often Mom and Becky and their family, and my sister comes home, my daughter comes home from Montana every week, or every year now for a week, which I'm just so grateful that, you know, she's 23 and she wants to come home and hang out in the Sugar House for a week every spring, and I love that. So, yeah, put them upside down so they can, you know, they seal the caps. Everything gets wiped off. And then did you take any of my sample jars?
Yep.
So he's got on top what the color, how you grade it out. And I guess, you know, as far as taste goes, that's how they grade it. But you need to taste it in order to say what's a robust taste, what's a rich taste, you know, what's the difference between that? I didn't bring any to sample tonight, but most everybody in here's already had it, so, right?
But on a daily basis, it's really different how different it tastes too.
Well, so, yeah, on these sample jars, and Jim had that nice picture of the mason jars, I have smaller ones. Every time we draw off, we've got to take a sample, so if the USDA comes in or the health department, I can go, you know, the guy can point to whatever on the shelf, and I can go there and identify the date on it and go to the packaging and figure out which package is in that jar so he can taste it, make sure it's graded properly. That's all part of this to make it right, and it's got to be done right or they'll fine you, and, you know, you're dealing with higher end, and that's what happens, so you got to do it right. But I do one every time, and early season you get this nice golden delicate. I think it comes out like that because Mother Nature is, you know, he said the chief put the curse on the woods. Well, up here it's Mother Nature putting the curse on the woods because she's relentless. But when the woods are covered in snow, the ground's covered and everything's clean, you get that nice early season lighter stuff, and as the season goes, the snow's melting, it turns dark, you get a warm day, and then inside the sugar house, keeping the tanks clean is a big thing for me, because when you draw them down, there's bacteria that can grow off of the bubbles and whatnot, and I try to do that as much as possible. The pans get cleaned and changed out after like every 80 gallons. You know, we change the front pan to make sure that's clean and different things. And then like this year, because it was such a freaky warm spring, I guess, I don't know if it was really ever winter up here, but we made the most dark syrup I've ever seen, and it was just every day. Mom said one day, she's like, it gets better every time it comes off, you know, because it did really, you know, so made a lot of that, and everybody seems to like it. We don't really get to have too much fun with the jack wax on the left for Maple weekends, because unfortunately now the snow's gone by early March, mid-March. Packaging on the right, they're pretty, you know, they're fancy. I like small jars. And yeah, right now you can go, I mean, like the lady at the farmer's market in Old Forge, Shaw, she's one that makes the candies, the barbecue, the mustard, For right now, I'm a crafter and I wanna make the best syrup that we can make, and we stick to that. My sister's a baker. She messed around with the sugar candy 2 years ago, and it's not for everybody, right?
No.
It's not easy at all.
Yeah.
Once you get to that level too, you gotta have, you gotta be inspected by the health department for that stuff. When you're making syrup, you just do your regular inspections, and they show up when they want. They don't even announce it, so. Lots of different routes to go with maple, for sure, you know. Maybe someday when I have more time, I'll go more routes, but syrup's enough for now.
Any questions that anybody has?
Eric, how much variation is there year to year in the amount you produce?
Mother Nature rules that. So this
Twice
year,
as much or half?
this year I made twice as much as last year because we started 3 weeks earlier. I made syrup this year in February, never made it that early here. And last year was super cold right till April 1st. Every morning was like 5-10 degrees, and when it's that cold, the trees actually will freeze, so it takes a couple days for them to thaw. And when they're not putting out every day, you're just not getting the product in. So last year I made 150 gallons, and this year I made a little over 300. And this year I had sat basically, there was 1 week right in the middle for 10 days it was super cold, but because we made syrup 3 weeks before that, and then 3 weeks after, it gave us what we would call a full crop here. You're looking for like 1/3 of a gallon per tap. I'm like 1,200 gallons, so it's like 1/4 of a gallon per tap of finished product, but I'm in the neighborhood of where I should be on that, so.
Where can I buy that jam?
I don't know, that's not mine. Jim, where can she buy the jam?
I don't know, I got a picture off of Amazon, so I don't know if they sell it or not.
Amazon.
Maple Moss Sugar Works, I'm right up the road
What is it
here.
called?
Maple Moss Sugar Works, I'm right up the road here on Limekiln Lake Road,
Okay,
1 mile.
great.
Yep.
Because I'm from Lewis County,
Oh.
and, yeah, so, I'm really good friends with the Mosier family.
Yep.
And so, but they have a great production
They,
system
I mean,
too.
they sell all over
Yeah,
here.
so,
you
but I'm interested, because it's interesting to hear about your side of the story too. So.
Yeah, I think that, well, over in Lewis County, don't they say the syrup's better on one side of the Black River than the other?
Well, that's what they say.
Yeah.
He's on the other side of the Black River than I am.
It's all good, though. Good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does maple syrup have a sell-by date, or does it go bad?
We always recommend you use it within the first year, but what we do when we're like if mom's not there, and I do this purposely sometimes to make sure that I can do it by myself, if somebody's not available, I put it in barrels. And then as I need it, I reheat it, refilter it, and it's basically fresh at that point. And so we package a bunch of stuff at the beginning of the season, and then as I run out on the shelf, or right now I have Space and Old Forge, they have it, and I have to pack